It had been a long 5 years. A lot of years filled with ups and downs, and it kind of all started at a party that he and the guys had thrown. It was a party to celebrate a lot of planning, months and months of a business plan that they had put together. And now they were going to celebrate because this plan was about to launch. And so they had this huge celebration. And just a little bit, well, actually, way too much wine. One bad decision after another, it led to a huge fight with his wife that then led to the end of their marriage. The next 3 years, very ugly years. The business plan they put together, it failed. He lost a lot of trust. He lost his wife, and he was lonely. He was there all by himself. And one of those times, he just decided that I'm tired of loneliness, and so I'm going to find me a new wife, a much younger wife. And so he did. A younger wife. Boy, she was beautiful. But eventually, that beauty ran out as well. And after some time, that beauty went away, and then it had been over a month since they had talked. He just stayed at the office while she handled things at home, and it didn't bother her all that much either, because she had lots of clothing, nice clothes, lots of jewelry. She had a beautiful home, and she got to go eat wonderful meals anywhere she wanted to with all of her girlfriends. It just became normal. He didn't have time for her because every week there was something new to deal with at the office. Every week, every day, there was something else that would come across his table, and frankly, he just got sick and tired of dealing with it all. Week after week, there's a new problem. And then just going home would present more problems, so he just stayed at the office. You see, he was the king. He had a lot of big decisions to make. And he was tired of making big decisions, especially decisions about the petty things that kept coming across this table. He'd gotten to the point he was just as sick of problems, and he was sick of everyone. And then Haman, his right-hand man, the only guy he really trusted anymore, came into the office and said, "Xerxes, I've got an issue. And I know you don't want to deal with this, but I'll handle this. I'll take care of this, but I just need your approval to handle this and to take this." What is it, Haman? What is it you want? See, there's this people, Xerxes. There's this people, and they're all scattered throughout your empire, and their customs aren't our customs. Their language isn't our language. Their ways aren't our ways, and frankly, they're not interested in your ways, and they're causing all kinds of problems. They don't have any interest in obeying your laws, and it's really, king, it's not to your best interest that they even stay around. And so what I'm asking you is, I just need your signature on this expense report right here to hire some men to take care of it. I'll handle it, Xerxes. I'll take care of it. I'll make sure that they're wiped out. Fine. Just handle it. I don't have time right now to deal with people. Just deal with it. I don't have time for people, especially people that have no interest in my ways. So Haman, he handled it. He set the plan in motion to kill every Jew that lived within the walls of Persia. And Mordecai, a Jew, and the cousin to Queen Esther, who had not talked to her husband in almost a month, he got the news that he and his people were all going to be killed. And so he rips off his clothing, he puts on sackcloth, and he goes and he's just mourning and he's wailing. But he only goes as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter the gates. In every province to which the edict and the order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews. With fasting and weeping and wailing, many lay in sackcloth and ashes. But they only went as far as the king's gate. Why? Because everyone knew that the people who live inside the king's gates, they're the ones who have it all together. Everyone knew that only those inside the king's gate were the best looking people. The people with no problems, getting it all right all the time. Inside the gates of Xerxes' palace, the rest of the world's problems didn't exist. There was no mourning in his palace. There's no fasting. There's no weeping. And there's definitely no sackcloth inside of King Xerxes' palace. That only happened outside the gates. But there, inside the king's gates, there were a few people, a handful of people that cared about what was going on outside of the gates. Most of the time, they were kind of oblivious to the problems of the world, and they found it much easier and safer just to stay inside the palace gates because they had everything that they needed. But here and there, they'd catch wind of a problem that's going on outside of those gates. And then every now and then, they want to reach out and they want to fix it. And that was Queen Esther. Queen Esther, she caught hint that her cousin Mordecai was hurting. He's mourning, and he's wailing, and he's sitting at this gate, and he's wearing sackcloth. No, don't let him wear sackcloth. And so she sends clothes. Go to Kohl's, pick him up. No, I hear he's really well. Go to Jose Banks, pick him up something really nice, and send him some great clothing. But new clothing wasn't going to take care of this issue this time. You see, Esther had to get involved. She was going to have to go to the king. But there were a lot of problems at home. All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces, they know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned by the king, he has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king decides to extend his scepter to them and spare their life. But 30 days have passed since Esther was called to go to the king. You see, King Xerxes had created a kingdom where all problems of the world happen outside of his gates. None of this happens inside of my palace. And he created a kingdom that said, I am powerful, and I don't want you to come to me unless I call you to me. And that goes for family members as well. And so many like Esther, there were many like Esther that at one time they lived outside of the gates of the palace. But when they got into the palace, they too lost sight of the hurting world that was happening outside of the gates. And so they fell into the thinking, well, we can just send clothes. We can send money. That should fix the problem. I don't have to face the fact that people are about to die. I just need to make sure that they have food and shelter and clothing. That should take care of it. You see, that's the life inside the kingdom that Xerxes created. And folks, this morning I pray that from the stories that you have heard, I pray this morning that you will know that King Jesus is nothing like King Xerxes. You see, there are so many barriers to King Xerxes. Outside the gate, Mordecai and the Jews, they couldn't get to him because of their mourning and their hurting and their sackcloth. They weren't dressed appropriately. They didn't act right. They didn't do all the right things that he wanted, and therefore they had no access to King Xerxes. But inside the gate, Esther also had a barrier to the king, and that was fear. I might be in the palace, but I better behave. I better have my act together. I better look good. I better be well put together. You see, Esther and Mordecai, they had the same issue. Neither of them could get to the king. One of them was physically closer, but both of them had a barrier to the king. You see, we can be inside or outside the gate and still have a barrier to the king. And I believe it's the same thinking that many of us who sit in this room today might even have about King Jesus. So many of us think that Jesus is like Xerxes, but I want you to know today, he is so different. He is so different. There's some of you who are sitting here today and you think that you can't come to Jesus because your life isn't put together and you can't imagine that he would want anything to do with you. You might not even be interested in his ways, but you're here today at the gates just kind of going, but I might actually want to meet him. I might actually just want to get to know him a little bit, but you think that there's no way that he would want to give you access to him. Some of you, you've got too many hurts in your life. You're kind of like Mordecai. So much brokenness. You feel like you're dressed in sackcloth all the time. You're mourning, you're hurting, you're weeping, and you can only go as far as sitting here in church, the gates to the kingdom of Jesus. And you feel like, I just got to be silent. I got to sit here because the king, he really wouldn't have any interest in me. And many of us were like Esther. We've been invited into the palace. We've actually been in the palace for a while. You still carry this thinking that you can't talk to the king. You can't approach him. You can't bring your problems to him. I got to have it all together. But hey, at least I'm not outside the gate. At least I'm in the palace. But I got to make sure that I keep things together. But you are still far from the king. I want to tell you some things about King Jesus. King Jesus, so different than King Xerxes. Romans 5:8. God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, while we were still sitting in sackcloth, King Jesus died for you. While your life was falling apart, when you had no interest in obeying his laws and his ways, God sent his son, King Jesus, to die for you. King Xerxes would have just wanted you dead. Romans 8:15. For you didn't receive a spirit that makes you a slave again to fear, but you received the spirit of sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. Hebrews 4:15 and 16. We don't have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who's been tempted in every way, just as you and I have, yet he didn't sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. You see, we don't have a king that says, I want you to be afraid of me. We don't have a king that says, you can only come to me when I extend my scepter to you and I invite you. We have a king that says, I'm your brother. Let's go and talk to our Father together. Let's go to the throne with confidence and let's ask him for grace and mercy. I'm your king. Let's go together. He's the King of kings. He's the Lord of lords. He longs for the gates of his palace to be flung wide open and to kept open so that all might come in, that all might come and sit with him, that all might come and eat with him, all might come and sit at his throne with him. And he promises us, King Jesus promises you to give you new clothing that will never wear out, food that will never spoil. He promises to provide your every need, to heal all your pains, to wipe away every tear. But he warns us in doing that. I'm not doing that so you can then look at the rest of the world and say, see, the only way you can be in the palace is by having it all together. No, he tells us, come inside the gates. Come into my palace and realize that I died for all. That those who should no longer live, who receive that, they should no longer live, but for him who died for them and was raised again. See, he died for us so that we might live for him. And that means we don't just sit inside the palace. It means we go outside of the palace and we tell the whole world that the gates to King Jesus' kingdom are wide open and he invites you to come in. We don't just clothe people or feed people, though that's very important. But even more important, our world needs to know that there's a king that is not out to destroy them. Our world needs to know that there's a king that is here to save them. And that's why we don't just send clothes, we take clothing. That's why we don't just send money, we send people. And I want to thank all of you who went this summer. Thank you for leading us this morning. Thank you for your stories. Thank you for the way that you didn't just send things, but you took them. You went. We've been changed and we become the vehicles God uses to bring life to this world. And that is why today we've told so many stories. But the temptation isn't the temptation for all of us to receive the mercy and the grace that's been extended to us by King Jesus and then to live inside the gates of his palace, not realizing that the rest of the world is hurting and dying. There's so many outside the gates that don't want anything to do with King Jesus because they've met too many Hamans. People who live inside the palace who are just out to destroy them instead of saying, I want you to meet my king. You see, arranging your life to avoid those in sackcloth, those that are poor, those that are hurting, that's like living in King Xerxes' palace, not King Jesus. Arranging your life to avoid mourning and brokenness and hardship is living in King Xerxes' palace, not King Jesus. Living in a manner that says to just cover it up, put on new clothes, just send more money, just buy them a good meal, and never putting yourself in a place where you get to sit at the gate with a person and to invite them to come and meet your king is like sitting at King Xerxes' palace, not King Jesus. Avoiding and damning neighbors around you because their behavior isn't the behavior that King Jesus would approve, that's living in King Xerxes' palace, not King Jesus. Believing that every person that's homeless or poor must not know Jesus, and therefore they need you to send them more money or newer clothes so life can be right, that's living in King Xerxes' palace, not King Jesus. If there's anyone around you that you think, wow, they deserve hell, they deserve damnation, they deserve to die because they're not interested in King Jesus, if that is your attitude, you've lost sight of the mercy and grace of King Jesus that's been extended to you. And he says, that's not my palace. That's King Xerxes. King Jesus, he's inviting all of us to come on in. Come meet his Father. Come sit. Talk with him. Come and receive his mercy and grace. And this morning, I want to say, for those of you who've never come inside these gates, if you've never met King Jesus, I can't imagine why you wouldn't want to come and meet him. He is nothing like Xerxes. And I want to invite you this morning. Would you come and meet my king? He's amazing. He loves you exactly where you are. He wants to meet you. He wants to introduce himself. He wants you to live in his palace. He loves you so much. His name is King Jesus. And I invite you this morning to meet him. If you want to meet him and talk with him, I invite you to talk with him right now while I pray to him for all of us. If you're already following King Jesus and you'd like to talk with him right now, I'd encourage you, if you're following him, talk with him about people that you've left outside the gate instead of introducing him to them. This morning, would you come and meet my King Jesus? Let's pray together. Father, this morning we've heard stories of lives that have been changed inside the gate and outside the gates. What a joy to hear those stories. They're stories of King Jesus, not of King Xerxes. And so this morning, Jesus, I want to introduce to you some friends of mine that might be sitting here today who've just been sitting outside of your gates in sackcloth, afraid that you don't want anything to do with them. If that's you this morning, would you just introduce yourself to Jesus? And I want to introduce you to him. And he's saying to you that, welcome into my kingdom. I love you. I want to take care of you. Would you come? Would you live with me? And so, Jesus, we celebrate those this summer who've met you on these mission trips. I celebrate those who've met you for the first time and come into your palace. I also celebrate the many people on these mission trips that we've been able to send who may have kept a barrier between you and them of fear. Thank you that you've broken down those barriers. Would you continue to meet them? Thank you that the gates of your kingdom are wide open. And this morning, we stay not too far inside the palace and not too far out, but we stand at the gate introducing people to you. would you be worshiped this morning? In your name we pray. Amen.